So Coleman says this is the big engine, the one from the CX-5, he says. Okay, let's put that to the test. Here we go. That's all the way down. Got a bit of an incline, and that's 60. Not that this is a 0 to 60 thing. It's plenty for what it's supposed to be, but I'm telling you, man, I think this is underpowered. I think it needs just a wee bit more power.
All right, MotoMan obviously has been driving too many AMG GTs because he just got in the most powerful car in the segment and complained that it wasn't fast enough. Look, this is a normal person car for normal people that don't have 600 horsepower. In this segment, 2.5 liter naturally aspirated engine is pretty strong, pretty direct, and pretty much gets the job done. So quit your whining. He also wanted to talk about cylinder deactivation, I think. Sometimes when you're at light cruise, it'll switch from 4 cylinders to 2 cylinders to save gas. You'll never know what happened unless you go to the display that tells you you can't feel it. It's not actually a new thing. The CX-5, when we came out with a new body style, about 6 months after that, or maybe a year after that, we started putting cylinder deactivation version of the engine in that car. Mazda 3 also has it available. This is the same engine that's in a Mazda 3 and a CX-5, which means it's quite a bit faster than a CX-5. It's a little bit slower than a Mazda 3 because you understand how power and weight work. He also wanted me to tell you that Skyactiv X is coming. I don't know when it's coming. We've made this new engine. We sell it in Europe. I think we might have started selling it in Japan. We'll figure out when we're going to sell it here. It's the future. I'm not allowed to talk about the future. But I know the future. I have a time machine at home. And I've been there, and it's pretty cool.
Let's push things a bit more aggressively, but not too crazy considering the remit of this vehicle, which brings us to steering. And there I would argue steering is incredibly important in cars like this, not because young families that want to cart the rugrats around are looking for amazing feedback in their steering, but it aids in the use, or really the drivability, the ease of drivability around a town, which means you got to have a little bit of feedback in a car like this. You can't have these like numb, no feedback e-pass systems that we've been seeing over the past couple of years as they cascade throughout the segment of these lower price crossovers. Here, this has been blessed with a little bit of feedback. It's not something that you'd expect, say, in an MX-5, but you can tell that someone has put, I think the best way to describe it as we get a little bit more aggressive here is, someone's put a little bit of weight into the steering of a vehicle that is going to be used around town for 90% of its purposes.
All right, MotoMan doesn't know this, but we changed the way our iActive all-wheel drive works on the CX-30 and the Mazda 3. We used to just look at temperature and wheel slip and windshield wipers and all this and try to predict what the weather was going to be. Instead of trying to predict what the weather is going to be, we're trying to predict where we need the torque wheel to wheel and put it where it needs to be before we need it. So what we're doing is we run basically a video game algorithm that's modeling the vehicle dynamics of the car as we drive. We know how fast we're going, we know how we're accelerating, we know how we're turning, and using that algorithm we can calculate how much vertical load is on each tire, and that tells us how much grip each tire has and how much work each tire is doing, and therefore tells us where we should be sending torque front or back on the fly. A couple other things we did besides that, sort of expanding the performance envelope, we also made the system more efficient by making it so that when we don't need any rear torque, we can actually go 100% front wheel drive. Previously, we only went as far as 98% front wheel drive, and there were two things we were trying to do with that. One, we wanted the system to be really quick. When we say we want 20% rear torque, we want it to immediately go to 20% torque so fast that you don't feel any change, you don't feel any of the slip that we were trying to prevent. And normally, if you go to completely 100% front wheel drive, the rear drive line, the gears get a little bit of backlash in them, and there's a little bit of, well, one, there's a rattle noise. That's the one thing we were trying to avoid. But that backlash causes a little bit of inconsistency in how quickly we can get the torque to the rear. So say you're driving the gears this way, they happen to be loaded up right, you can immediately get torque to the rear. If they're loaded up this way, you've got a fraction of a second where the teeth go and load up in the other direction. And that fraction of a second is enough to affect the way the car drives. So we used to always just preload the drivetrain. Now we've come up with a new trick where we get rid of the rattle by putting a damper on the input side to the all-wheel drive. So the vibration that caused that rattle is completely gone. The rear drivetrain doesn't make any noise. But to make it respond quickly, regardless of where we are in that backlash, we overdrive the rear wheels a little bit. So if we were to lock up the torque coupling, the rear goes 1.1% faster than the front. And what that means is the clutch plates are constantly slipping against each other even when they're unloaded. There's no drag when you do that because they're not touching each other. But as soon as we load those clutch plates against each other, because they're moving, they take up the backlash instantly. And you can see if our algorithm is telling us to target 20% rear torque, it immediately goes to 20% torque because of that take up of the backlash. So net result is you're not going to feel anything. The car just drives perfectly everywhere, no matter what you want. But there's a lot of science behind it.
Okay, so enough of Coleman blabbering on. Now it's time for you and I to get practical. And I go back to a place I don't like being. I have roped in Scotty, my fellow world carger, to do some driving. And this is where I, a 6-footer, would sit. Clearly not a lot of space here, which brings up a huge point. Coleman put me through an hour-and-a-half presentation this morning. An hour and a half, burning good daylight, which we need to use to shoot. And in the presentation, it showed all the cars this thing competes with. And I was thinking this is more of like a rogue competitor when you look at it from pictures and video. It turns out it competes, at least according to Coleman in this presentation, to Buick Encore, Subaru Crosstrek, Jeep Renegade, and the visuals didn't back that up, but now that I sit back here, I can kind of see that, because look, there's not a lot of knee room here. Just last week in that Sonata in Phoenix, I was able to cross my legs. This, not so much. Then let's do the old road wife test, and that's actually who's driving my road wife. There is no USB, there's nothing here, so we can't plug the phone in. But we do have a cup holder to either store drinks or your phone. Yes, it is indeed that time again to play your favorite game in mind, the options game, with today's contestant, a Mazda, just not that one. Although our contestant's real close because it's the exact same color and perhaps a taller version of this Mazda 3. So with that, let's dive right in. 2020 Mazda CX-30 Premium for $29,600. Would like to point out that the one we're driving is all-wheel drive, which translates to $1,400 additional dollars over a front-wheel drive of the same vehicle. Then there's only one factory option, and that is indeed that amazing color Soul Red Crystal. You need to see it in person, worth every penny of $595, which is the same price on the Mazda 3. Then there are two accessories. The first is a frameless auto dim mirror. That can be had on any trim level of CX-30. It's $275. And then the navigation SD card. This is a roundabout way of saying that navigation is sort of fitted as standard on Mazdas now that they have this fancy UX system. One just needs to buy the software and the maps on an SD card for $450. To that, we add a destination handling fee of $1,045 for a total retail price of $31,965. Now, I'm kind of sandbagging you here because I picked the fanciest car like I do in those Hyundai episodes. The Premium has the sunroof, it has leather seats, it has paddle shifters, it has light signatures, and a power liftgate. But in reality, Coleman and the folks at Mazda are trying to appeal to my cheapskate side because there is a lot cheaper way to do this. The basic CX-30 is $21,900. Front-wheel drive can be had in all-wheel drive. But really, one would need to get to the Select package, which is $23,900, because that's where you first get onto CarPlay and Android Auto, as well as privacy glass and bigger wheels. Then there is a Preferred package, $26,200, also can be had in front-wheel drive and all-wheel drive. That's where you get into better colors. The machine gray is on offer. And then back to this whole premium model, I would argue it's not just about the fancy stuff and the cylinder deactivation, it's the colors. It's Soul Red that's on offer, the machine gray, and that stunning polymetal gray we first saw on the Mazda 3. Being it's a Mazda, I feel we should try the brake trick. Bist du fertig? Ich auch. Accelerate a bit here, and then 60. Panic stop. Oh, okay. As of late, I've been doing that trick more and more and really looking for two things there. Number one, I'm looking for pedal feel. Number two, I'm looking for how does the vehicle maintain its composure? Does it pull from one side to the other? Is it even? Is there a tremendous amount of dive in the front? Here it was composed on all levels and there was a good amount of feedback. Is it something that you would get in, say, like an MX-5? No. But you can tell that there is a relation to an MX-5.
So MotoMan thinks this looks just like a tall Mazda 3. Well, in some respects he may be right. But what we've done with the CX30 is we've made sure that the volume of the vehicle looks small, so it has more of a sports car feel in a taller package. How did we do that? Well, one thing we did is we tried to reduce the mass between the wheel opening and the window. SUVs, CR-V, for example, very tall and boxy look. The other way we do it is we break up the body color mass with the lower by introducing this black cladding. So it visually makes the vehicle look lighter and more agile. The other thing is, by not having any character lines on the body surface, it also makes the vehicle feel longer and sleeker, and therefore gives it more of a sports car feel to it.
Okay, so Ken just admitted to you this is a total Mazda 3, which means it has the same suspension as a Mazda 3, at least an all-wheel drive Mazda 3, because this one's all-wheel drive. As such, let's push a little bit harder going around some of these turns and see how that ass end feels. And it's identical to Mazda 3 in that even though it's not a fancy multi-link system, there is still composure to it.
So remember that thing about our iActive all-wheel drive and how it has that algorithm and knows where to put the torque and all that? None of that works when you go off-road, because you're assuming that you're on flat ground and that you're going fast enough for that algorithm to actually mean anything. So when you go out here on something lumpy, you might have one wheel up in the air and it's spinning and the algorithm can't see that. So we put a new off-road mode, it's called off-road traction assist in this car, and it does two things. One, it at low speed, below about 15 miles an hour or so, it throws that whole algorithm out the window and just starts in full all-wheel drive. And then as you speed up, it'll slowly kind of taper off and feed back into the normal algorithm as you're going fast enough for it to work. But that way, if you're starting on something really slippery, you don't have to spin the tires first and then recover. It just starts on all four tires. The other thing it does is it changes the traction control algorithm. So normally, our traction control is not really biased towards stopping a wheel from spinning. It's biased toward making the car accelerate as fast as possible. Our basic idea there is if you wooded it because you're turning in front of a truck, we don't want to stop that tire from spinning. We want you to get past the truck before you die. So we'll gradually brake a little bit on that spinning tire, and we'll bring the torque down a little bit and sort of try to get the tire and the car to meet in the middle. But that's the fastest way to get the car to go. Once you're on something lumpy like this and you have a wheel up in the air digging a hole, that doesn't work anymore. We have to grab the brake really hard, and we don't want to reduce the torque because we want you to be able to climb up whatever it is you're trying to climb up. So that's all it does. You push that off-road traction assist mode. Technically it does nothing until you spin a tire, and then it goes, ah, you really meant it. And then it switches into this mode where it can work on stuff like this.
So ride quality. This ain't going to be a long discussion considering who manufactures this vehicle, because they are in the business of composure, which translates to ride quality. And it doesn't change whether it's a small crossover, a larger crossover, a sports car with a folding top. There is composure across the board. Here, as we get more aggressive, the area that you would see a degradation of ride quality would be in pitch, because the center of gravity is higher, especially in a shorter wheelbase vehicle. It's more impacted. And I'm not noticing a degradation. Yeah, you notice that it is a smaller crossover, but that's really it.
All right, MotoMan wanted to know why it wasn't called a CX-4. So I'm gonna give you a little challenge here. Google Mazda CX-4, do an image search. You're gonna find pictures of another car that's already called a Mazda CX-4. It's sold in China. We're still selling it in China. It's very successful over there. And if we made another CX-4 and you Googled CX-4, it would still show up and you'd be really confused. So why don't we call it a CX-3? Because there's a CX-3 still. This car's bigger than the CX-3. CX-3 is the right size for really lots of small markets. So we're gonna keep making the CX-3. So we couldn't think of any other numbers between 3 and 4. So we came up with 30. That's a different number than 3 and 4. And now you can figure out what car this is. This is a CX-30. You're welcome.
Remember back to the Mazda 3 episode we shot up in Tahoe. There we learned from the folks at Bose that they reclaimed some of the real estate from the Mazda engineers on the firewall where they mounted the subwoofers. And this is a trick we learned with Mercedes back in 2013, where by putting the bass on the firewall, it makes it a much tighter sound overall. Now you'd expect that in a $100,000 car, and it works really well there. This is a $20,000 car, well not this one, a Mazda 3. And now I have the benefit of spending a lot of time with the car you're seeing in the studio in this episode. I spent about a week with that car. And yeah, the components are not as fancy as the Burmester and the Mercedes, but the baseline is equally as tight. That system cascades its way into this CX-30.
There you go. Park the car for you, sir.
Remember in the CX9 episode, Coleman showed us how they programmed the two operating systems, the Mazda UX and then CarPlay or Android Auto, to work side by side but not step on each other. This is really the first time I've actually spent some time using it. And like, for example, I'm using the pre-programmed navigation from the Mazda folks on this route they've got us on. But if I want to go over to the Apple operating system, I just literally press and hold this button here, and I'm into my phone, and I can do whatever I want within my phone here. And I could even pull up the maps from my phone, but if I hit navigation, it goes back to the active navigation, which is the Mazda UX. That is arguably one of the best integrations I have ever seen, and I know it's actually more than Coleman that engineered this. It's a good looking car, man. I gotta admit, it really does stand out. Mazda's, they've been on top of their design for a long time, but I would argue in this segment, man, they're gonna clean up. And it's not just the design, this is an unusually good place to be, like unusually good, not just for the segment, but for any car, because it's screwed together well, the color and trim, the tactile feel all works. And I've shared with you, man, I am a cheapskate, you know that. And when you consider, I mean, think about the numbers we played with in the options game. When you consider what this thing costs, like, this is not optional. Like, that color and this, that's not optional. The fact that that comes in the cheap car, if I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, Mazda, they are going to mop the floor with everybody's asses with this thing. Am I right? Am I wrong? Let me know in the comments below. Oh, and why? What are you doing?
I'm checking the cross twist stability of the car. Very good, rock solid.
How's it working?
It's perfect. This is ideal human-centric cross twisting stability, tire rigidity.
Is this a real Mazda test?
Yeah, absolutely. We do this to every car.
This is behind the scenes of Mazda engineering.
Yeah, at the end of the production line, we have somebody that stands on the tires like this on every one of them, just to make sure.
Was this your first job at Mazda?
Yeah, I was a tire stander on a dude.